From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine.
Good morning, everyone. Nick Beres here. Thanks for joining me on MorningLine. It's a Wednesday. We have a good show on tap for you. We're going to open up the phone lines and give you a chance to call in and ask a question if the topic suits your fancy. And this is something maybe all of us think about at one point or another. Did we get the proper care that we should be getting? How do I know whether or not I have a malpractice lawsuit, whether or not the doctor, the hospital, or wherever it is you went, perhaps a clinic, did you right or wrong? So it's kind of an Ask an Attorney show this morning, but it's going to be, legally speaking, more toward the malpractice aspect of it. And we'll put up the phone number for you in just a moment here. As you see this morning, 737-7587. It's up there. Our guest to take your calls and to talk to me. Yeah, he has to do that too. It's Attorney Clint Kelly.
Morning, Nick. How are you doing?
It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
It's a pleasure. Yeah. So, as I said, you're a lawyer. Right. You have your good general legal background because you had to go through law school, but your specialty is malpractice?
That's correct. I'm board certified medical malpractice specialist in Tennessee. If
you would, just for the viewer, I think they hear malpractice. I think most of us know what that means, but what is the definition of malpractice? And does malpractice sometimes cross from civil to criminal? Can it?
Well, first of all, medical malpractice, or what they now call healthcare liability, is a case in which a healthcare provider, whether it's a doctor or a nurse, has departed from the standard of care, is not providing reasonable care, and that failure to provide reasonable care causes a patient to suffer an injury which would not otherwise have occurred. And there's a lot of arguments back and forth about whether or not the negligence causes an injury. It can blur into the criminal field if you have a situation perhaps where a physician or nurse is impaired, intoxicated. Typically that would be the only scenario. Because
have you ever seen a case like that?
Once.
Once, where literally a nurse or a physician in an OR was impaired because of
alcohol.
So he had a couple, or she had a couple of drinks before they went into OR.
Well, he had a long-standing alcohol problem, and one of the issues he had was going into surgery either hungover or while he was under the influence, and the nurses who worked with him knew that, and at some point disclosed that at the time that we were investigating the case.
Isn't that a scary thought for any patient? My gosh, you've only seen it once, thankfully, but it happens.
It happens. It happens outside the medical field. It's more personal within the medical field because people obviously have a one-to-one interaction, and they're very vulnerable during surgery, so you can imagine how scary that would be for any patient.
Now, that's a blatant case of when you talk about looking at the standards of whether or not, if you're drunk and you're going in and performing surgery, obviously that's a problem on a large scale. But how do you know whether or not the care you've received meets the standard? You have to compare to other physicians. What is the standard?
It starts first with usually the patient or the patient's family has some reason to believe that the care was bad because it starts with an injury. It can either a serious injury or it can start with unfortunately death. And the patient or the patient's family realizes in their own mind, their gut tells them something just didn't go right here. And a lot of times they'll go and they'll talk to their family doctor, or they'll talk to a friend who's in the healthcare profession, whether that be a nurse or maybe even another physician, and those healthcare providers will recommend to the family, call a lawyer. Or the family, the patient will have the good sense to call a lawyer and say, look, I want to get this case reviewed. I mean, our reviews are free. Consultation's free. There's no expense. And if we have a case that's been sent to us, we will pass it on to a medical expert, usually a physician, who will review the conduct in the case and determine whether or not the care was appropriate.
That's sometimes why these kind of cases can be expensive, because you have to bring expert testimony in to kind of, these doctors don't do it for free. Oh. The ones you go to, but they're the ones, that can say, look, I'm seeing how this was done and it was wrong. You're getting a doctor to testify against a doctor.
That's right, and that's why it is expensive. And Nick, they deserve to charge a lot of money because the experts have their own practices. They're busy as well. They have to take time from that practice to review a case, and so they're losing money if they're not charging for their services to evaluate a case. But what that can do in your typical malpractice case, that can run up expenses somewhere north of $50,000 just to get the case to trial. So we as medical malpractice specialists on the plaintiff side have to be very careful about the cases we take.
Yeah, you're very selective on this. And the other side of this too, you talk about maybe a family having a sense that something just went wrong. But you know as well as I do, there are cases where maybe people go in for what they think is going to be a routine surgery and something happens and God forbid they die, okay? Just because a patient dies or the doctor can't save them doesn't mean the doctor did something wrong, correct?
That is correct. In fact, that's the law, Nick.
Yeah.
The law says you cannot presume negligence from an injury, and doctors don't guarantee a good result. Lawyers don't guarantee a good result. What you are guaranteed is that by law, that healthcare professional will provide the standard of care, the appropriate standard of care. That is what's guaranteed. And when that does not happen and it causes an injury, then you may well have a case.
We'll get into some specific cases here, and we're going to take some phone calls, some of them coming in, 737-7587. I wanted to ask you, what's the climate like right now in Tennessee? One of your colleagues that you know that handles a lot of workers' comp claims and such, that his office isn't far from yours there in Hendersonville, Andy Allman, talks about how the laws continue to change to a degree, making it more difficult for individuals to sue the big business. And I'm wondering, is it more difficult than ever for patients to sue hospitals, doctors?
It is, and it's getting worse. There were some laws that were passed in 2008 and 2009 to specifically make it harder for patients to bring claims against physicians. The procedural hurdles to get to court are much more difficult now. And right now we have a judicial retention election. It's going to take place tomorrow. The concern among many members in the work that I do, and frankly any lawyer who represents injured patients, is concerned that if this court loses and the lieutenant governor, who is a very business-oriented, perhaps extreme business-oriented person, is able to have a hand in selecting the replacement justices, that those justices will likely be bought, for all intents and purposes, by contributions from that side of the pack, and that particular judge will be business oriented and will make it even more difficult for patients to sue, or injured parties to sue, or people who've been discriminated to sue. That is right now the environment that we're in. It's pretty scary.
It's a big deal. You've seen all the ads, and you're talking about the retention for 3 Supreme Court justices.
Justice Lee, Wade, and Clark, and it's very, very important that people get out and vote tomorrow.
Exactly. And the question on that, and I know you're a rational individual. As an average Joe, you and me alike, I mean, I want the system to be in place whereby if something really has gone wrong, you can sue. At the same time, there has to be a balance. I mean, you don't want to be able to have, patients, as they say, when a loved one dies or something like that, instantly suing doctors left and right, and there has to be a balance there, right? I mean, I understand how businesses and hospitals need some degree of protections. On the other hand, I don't want to be able to limit someone who really has an actionable offense to go after them. I mean, where's the balance there? Where's the balance? Because I don't want it just wide open, so constantly doctors are defending themselves half the time against frivolous lawsuits.
Well, for instance, right now, the system we have in place has done just that, which is limit lawsuits. We've been limiting lawsuits now for the last 5 years.
Legitimate ones.
Legitimate, yes,
Okay.
Legitimate limitations. And this court right now, as it's constituted, Judge Wade, Judge Clark, and Judge Lee, have kept a fair balance. In other words, the doctors and the hospitals across from the patients, everyone walks into court with a level, even playing field. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
If these judges lose and the lieutenant governor gets to pick his replacements, you're going to see that playing ground tilt in favor of the doctors and the hospitals, where it's going to be very, very difficult for patients to get their fair day in court.
Yeah, well, you've certainly seen a lot of the stories we've done. Phil Williams has done a lot of those stories.
Done an excellent job.
So just trying to highlight, do politics play a role? Unfortunately, it does everywhere, but it shouldn't in the judicial system. All right, listen, we're going to take a quick phone call before we go to the break, and then we'll get into much more with you. Let's take a call from Donnie. Donnie, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Donnie.
Hey, my question is, I was at Sumner Regional, and they put a needle in my vein, and they blowed it out. And now it ain't no good no more.
Kind of like it backed up, where they put the vein in like it was improperly placed, you believe, and it backed up and damaged the artery or the vein?
Yeah, see, they put a thing in my hand, and it messed it up real bad. But it's going down now, but it's been about a year.
Yeah, okay. Here, phlebotomists, and, that happens. How do you know in a case like this whether it's actionable?
Well, from what he's describing to me, it is hard to tell, because sometimes there are risks of procedures that are recognized by physicians and healthcare providers, and as I said, you can't guarantee a good result. The question here is, has he seen another healthcare provider to get a second opinion about, first of all, why this happened and whether or not this can be treated or cured? Because what he's saying, it sounds like it's getting better, and if it does get better, which we hope, then there's no point filing a malpractice lawsuit, because really the only medical malpractice cases that need to be brought, Nick, are ones in which there is a catastrophic permanent injury where the patient can't earn a living anymore, is bedridden or wheelchair ridden, or perhaps has lost their life. Those are the types of cases that juries expect to see. They do not like to see cases where there's temporary damages.
The kind of case he just described is one that we're going to show you a story I did with him with one of his clients where the result of a procedure basically changed the way his body functioned in a very, very negative way. Yeah. And you'll see what I mean. We'll have that story for you. We're going to get to more of your phone calls and continue our conversation with malpractice attorney Clint Kelly right after this. Stay with us.